Anniversaries suck on TV. The news industry is not really designed to commemorate things well. It always comes across as kind of hokey, right? But an anniversary like the one today, the 10th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, it's not just a commemoration for history's sake. It is also its own current, present-day fight over how this story will be written down in history. It's contested ground in part because so many of the people who were wrong about Iraq in the first place, people who caused that disaster, people who were factually wrong about it, are still around in our politics. And they do not want to be remembered as the architects of disaster. They don't want to be remembered as people who lied and who were wrong about something so grave. But the fact that they are still around to try to whitewash their own bios and revise their own history itself ends up being kind of an important part of our own history, right? Because it means that thus far, in the first 10 years, the Iraq disaster has thus far not been viewed as a big enough deal in our politics that the people who caused it are embarrassed for a lifetime and never asked to come back into discussions on this topic or anything like it.
Do you believe that the people of Iraq, or at least a large number of them, will treat us as liberators?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I believe that we can win an overwhelming victory in a very short period of time.
I believe that the success will be fairly easy.
John McCain, of course, not the only guy who was wrong, but just as a note here, today, on the 10th anniversary of the war that John McCain was so blatantly, obviously, horribly wrong about, the American Enterprise Institute, the foremost foreign policy entity on the American right, invited back for their discussion on Iraq 10 years later, John McCain. Hey, you were really terribly wrong about this very important thing, so 10 years later, we thought we'd come back to you for more. Yeah, the American Enterprise Institute website is actually worth looking at today in terms of the way that they are commemorating the 10-year anniversary. Their big splash page is 5 myths about Iraq. 10 years after its start, Iraq war opponents still don't acknowledge its merits. John Bolton breaks it down. Wow. Under the headline, "Liberty is no mistake," they caution that Iraq should be remembered without rewriting history, because it definitely wasn't a mistake. Their expert consultant on the most vital moral and strategic questions from the Iraq War is the guy who organized it, Paul Wolfowitz. On the occasion of the 10-year anniversary of the war, I did not really expect it to be this overt, but the Republican/conservative foreign policy establishment really is today in full PR mode to try to make it seem like this war in Iraq thing was actually a great idea and not at all the worst foreign policy disaster in maybe a century. I mean, there's Paul Wolfowitz on CNN over the weekend defending it. There's Michael O'Hanlon, one of the biggest think tank cheerleaders for the war from the very beginning, on MSNBC talking about it this afternoon. Hey, look, there's Donald Rumsfeld himself tweeting from @Rumsfeld office today. Quote, 10 years ago began the long, difficult work of liberating 25 million Iraqis. All who played a role in history deserve our respect and appreciation. You know, the nerviest thing about this is that Donald Rumsfeld has the gall to use the word history in the same breath in which he is asserting that the Iraq war was all about liberating the Iraqi people. They're really doing it. They're really trying to do it. They are using the 10-year anniversary of the war to try to make you believe that it didn't happen the way it happened. To try to make you believe that it really was all about liberating the Iraqi people from the tyrant. That's all they ever wanted to do, right? They want you to believe that what they proposed to the American people 10 years ago, 11 years ago, was that we go liberate the Iraqi people from a tyrant. And then the American people said, yes, we should go liberate the Iraqi people from a tyrant. And then we went and we were greeted as liberators. And of course, they had prepared us for how difficult it was going to be. We knew it would take 8.5 years and cost $3 trillion and kill thousands of people. But that's what we signed up for. They warned us. That's what we were going to do. They're saying, oh, yes, it was hard, but that difficult liberating work is what we all signed up for, and it has to be remembered as the history of that war. You know what? That's not the history of that war. And there is not a memory hole deep enough or wide enough to make us forget the real history of what happened. It's not that long ago that you're not caught on tape.
No terrorist state poses a greater or more immediate threat to the security of our people and the stability of the world than the regime of Saddam Hussein in Iraq.
We have what we consider to be credible evidence that al-Qaeda leaders have sought contacts in Iraq who could help them acquire weapons of mass destruction capabilities.
Do you have hard evidence that they're in Iraq?
Oh, there's no question but that al-Qaeda have moved through and some have stayed.
And that's not just an assumption, we know that.
I know that.
If Someone is waiting for a so-called smoking gun. It's certain that we will have waited too long.
What do you make of the statement made by the Iraqi government, yesterday that Iraq has no weapons of mass destruction and is not developing any?
They're lying. Next.
It is not knowable if force will be used, but if it is to be used, it could last, 6 days, 6 weeks. I doubt 6 months.
I doubt 6 months. My favorite Donald Rumsfeld assertions about the Iraq war were how specific he tried to get about these things that they were all making up. 11 days into the war, Donald Rumsfeld was asked by ABC if he was surprised that American forces hadn't yet found any weapons of mass destruction. His response, quote, "Not at all. We know where they are. They're in the area around Tikrit and Baghdad and east, west, south, and north somewhat." Yes, north, south, east, and west somewhat. We know exactly where they are. Donald Rumsfeld has been running from that history of having said stuff like that, of having made claims like that, not in passing, but as part of his case to the American people for why we had to wage this war. Donald Rumsfeld has been running from what he did for years now. In 2006, while the war was still at its height, a 27-year veteran of the CIA confronted Donald Rumsfeld about that whole north, south, east, west claim at a public forum.
It appears that there were not weapons of mass destruction there.
You said you knew where they were.
I did not. I said I knew where suspect sites were, and
You said you knew where they were, near Tikrit, near Baghdad, and north, east, south, and west of there. Those are your words.
My words were that... No. Wait a minute. Let him stay 1 second. Just a second.
This is America, huh? Go ahead.
You're getting plenty of play, sir.
I just like an honest answer.
I'm giving it to you.
No, you're not. These guys have been trying to run away from what they did ever since they did it. It is a revisionist history project to make us think they didn't screw up, that it wasn't a mistake. We're all supposed to keep looking to them as the experts on foreign policy and military intervention. How wrong do you have to be, and on how big a scale, before we stop listening to you? Donald Rumsfeld, I would love to hear your thoughts on light rail or growing mushrooms. Talk to me about acid reflux or bonsai gardening or home remedies for boils. But when it comes to the wisdom of invading Iraq, you have expired. All of you have. You had your time. You failed. It is over.